Coming up this evening, Britain pays its last respects to Her Majesty the Queen on the day of her funeral. We'll have all the highlights from this historic and momentous occasion. And we'll hear from our reporters who've been out and about today in central London and at Windsor. This is a special edition of the Evening News from Radio News Hub with me, Edward Breslin. Today, the nation has bid a fond farewell to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the country's longest-serving monarch. Born on the 26th of April 1926, the late Queen ascended to the throne on the death of her father in 1952. Becoming the only British sovereign to mark a Platinum Jubilee earlier this year, Her Majesty died at Balmoral on Thursday the 8th of September. Following a period of national mourning which saw hundreds of thousands of people queue to see Her Majesty's coffin as she lay in state, today the late Queen has been laid to rest. The day's events began with dozens of Royal Navy sailors pulling the state gun carriage carrying the Queen's coffin from Westminster Hall on the short journey to the state funeral service at Westminster Abbey. It was part of a procession led by a group of bagpipers. While waiting inside Westminster Abbey for the arrival of the procession were a congregation of over 2,000. They included world leaders like US President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron, heads of state from across the Commonwealth, all of the UK's living former prime ministers, and some members of the public who received awards in the Queen's birthday honours. Delivering the sermon at today's state funeral service was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby.
She was joyful, present to so many, touching a multitude of lives. And we pray today especially for all her family, grieving as every family.
And later in the service, the Archbishop led the commendation.
Let us commend to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer, the soul of Elizabeth, our late Queen.
Well, the state funeral service came to an end with a 2-minute silence, observed not just in Westminster Abbey, but right across the country. A procession then brought the Queen's coffin out of the Abbey and through the streets of central London, followed by the King, Her Majesty's other children, and other senior members of the royal family. The route took the Queen past her former home of Buckingham Palace for the final time, where a military band played. And our reporter Georgia Collins joined the crowds in London's Hyde Park this morning.
Today in London, the streets were filled with people from all corners of the world coming to say their last goodbye to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. At the start of the day, I made my way to Hyde Park to get a spot to catch the glimpse of the Queen's coffin on its journey to St George's Chapel. With the world watching their screens, it's believed that around 4.1 billion viewers watched the funeral. London itself was the busiest it's ever been. I didn't think anyone could have predicted just how many people would come to pay their respects. I was actually unable to get through the main areas of Westminster, as security actually stopped people walking in the areas as they had reached full capacity. Even at Hyde Park, from 10 a.m, people kept arriving. I spoke to some people that had been waiting since 6 a.m. this morning. By the time the Queen's hearse and procession came through at about 1 o'clock past Hyde Park Corner, the crowds were over 10 people deep.
Well, once the procession carrying the Queen's coffin reached Wellington Arch near London's Hyde Park, the coffin was transferred to the state hearse, which Her Majesty herself helped design. The hearse took the coffin on a slow, solemn journey to Windsor, where a committal service was held at 4 p.m. This was a smaller, more intimate ceremony than that at Westminster Abbey, and primarily for the Queen's family and close friends. Our reporter Tom Horn has spent the day in Windsor and sent us this look back at what's been happening.
It's been a very mixed day here at Windsor. Anticipation at the arrival of the Queen, sadness that this event is happening, and on the whole, optimism for the reign of the new monarch, King Charles III. At times, there's been an almost festival-like atmosphere here, with food stands, picnic blankets, and constant hands being raised to take pictures. Very early this morning, I spoke to the council leader here in Windsor. He seemed worried about whether the town would be able to cope with such a huge and historic event. Aside from some disruption on the trains, the town has coped well, despite crowds as far as the eye can see. One of the most striking things is just the variety of the people here to witness history and to pay their respects. Everyone, from young children to people who remember the previous coronation, were here, all of them full of love and respect for Queen Elizabeth.
Well, later this evening, a private burial service will take place in the King George VI Memorial Chapel within St George's Chapel at Windsor, attended only by the King and close members of the royal family. The Queen will be laid in her final resting place alongside her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, who passed away last year. Well, the mourning of the Queen has not been limited to just the capital, with people across the country coming together. Our reporter Jack Wilfan has been looking at the role that places of worship have been playing in marking this day.
Places of worship around the country have held screenings for the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Cathedrals in Bristol, Manchester, Salisbury and York, among others, have opened their doors for people to gather, to mourn together and watch the funeral on big screens. The Dean of Manchester explained why the cathedral had opened its doors today.
It's about solidarity. It's about watching the service together with others. There's a sense of camaraderie there. There's a sense of friendship, a sense of togetherness.
Following the service, these ex-servicemen told us why they had come to pay their respects.
We served the Queen, the pair of us, for our career, and
she was our Commander-in-Chief, so it's only right that you should show respect.
To see it on the big screen, but yeah, to be here and show exactly what she thought of us and what we thought of her,
Whilst in the West Country, local people outside Bristol Cathedral gave us their thoughts following the service.
It was a lovely service, actually, and a fitting tribute to our Queen.
It's just very moving, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It really was. Yeah, beautiful. It gave me goosebumps, actually.
I came here to respect the Queen and watch what was on the screen.
Well, today has, of course, been a day of sorrow and grief, but it's also been an opportunity to remember the Queen and share stories and anecdotes from her life. Here's one particularly funny tale from one of Her Majesty's many stays at her beloved Balmoral estate, as told by Charles Fletcher, a political reporter at the Scottish Parliament.
One day walking through the estate with one of her staff, and an American couple just happened upon her, and they exchanged good mornings, good days, and the American tourist, one of them, said, "This is such a lovely place. Do you live near here, or are you visiting?" And the Queen said that she had a little place just over the hill there. And one of the tourists then said, "That's quite amazing. I don't suppose you've ever met the Queen, have you?" And Her Majesty responded saying, "No, I haven't," but pointing to her member of staff said, "But he has." And one of the two tourists handed the Queen her camera and said, "I wonder if you would kindly take a photograph of the two of us with the man who's met the Queen." And the Queen said, "Yes, absolutely, perfectly happy to do that." So the Queen took a picture of two tourists with one of her members of staff, and they all went their separate ways. And the Queen said to her staff, "Do you think they'll ever find out?" And off they went chuckling.
This has been a special edition of the Evening News from Radio News Hub, on the day the nation said goodbye to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.